This is Sunday, April 5th. It's week 12 for Faith, Music, and Culture, our senior seminar. I'm going to do the same thing I did last week, try to just host talking through some of the slides, asking you to look through each one in detail. And then part of your assignment will be to look and find at least one quote from among these notes that really caught your attention or made you think a little deeper, and just include that in your weekly reflection at the end of this week. So the topic is on creativity. Of course, there's many things that could be said that don't need to, because we have all heard many things taught about this. Let me start with this idea that really is less about creativity, more just about life experience. I want to encourage you never to assume that longevity leads to being promoted. So your skills, your preparedness, your attitude, and your motivation will win every single time. There have been many times when I've seen young adults think that because they've been at a job longer than somebody else, that they should get the promotion regardless of their skill set or their preparedness for that. And that's just simply not true. So think about the way you do your work as a means of being promoted. Charles Mingus, this is a great quote. He's a legendary bass player and composer. Mingus said, making the simple complicated is common. A lot of people overly complicate songs that are straight ahead, but making the complicated awesomely simple, that's creativity. And of course, in this particular setting, he's talking about jazz, saying that the greatest of jazz players treat it with a sense of simplicity and directness that is rare and takes a long time to develop. But this could be true about how we share the gospel story. It could be about how you go about writing songs or playing in a band or mixing. Don't let your artistic skills become your identity, or else we can be tempted to treat creativity as an agenda. When creativity is an agenda, it might point at the fact that we're expecting too much out of creativity. Creativity is not your core identity, because you are not your craft. You are a person before you are a musician or a technician. How about some questions just to stimulate some thoughts? Again, this was ideally designed for group conversation, but you certainly can think about them yourself. What stimulates creativity for you? Are you aware of that? What kind of places do that? What's the role of knowledge and skill for being creative? How much should you know about something in order to be fresh with some ideas? What about the place of environment? How does that affect creativity? I often think about venues for live music and the creativity that goes into these rooms that really seems to help complement the nature of what we hear. What about the role of people that are being involved as you're being creative? Again, I think of a few key people in my life that, as we've tried to write and create music, simply just my friendship with them and the ways that I respect them as an artist has really, really stimulated creativity from me. In other words, they pull more things out of me when there's a sense of relationship with certain people. What about the role of mission and purpose for being creative? Sometimes, do you feel like this is for a greater purpose and reason? So, for example, the Enneagram album that was done recently from Sleeping at Last, he took all of the numbers and month by month would release a new single based on the new number, and wrote something about it that really gave something of deep purpose and creativity. What about deadlines? Do they help? Do they hinder? Sometimes there's a place for both. I know I've had both experiences where I feel like the deadline actually helped me get more done than I would have if I would have just been on my own time frame. Do you seek inspiration from other artistic disciplines? For example, songwriters might seek inspiration through poetry, maybe photography or dance or film. These are things that indirectly inspire your perspective and the ways that you view creating. What about the Inklings? This was this group of writers in the 30s and 40s in England that include C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien. They would meet in a pub, and oftentimes they would share things that they're in the midst of writing and thinking about, and they would affirm each other or challenge each other in good kind of ways, but they really spurred each other on. There was this intentional creativity that was being shared and fostered because of their time spent together. Last year, I went to this Carver Conversation, and Mako Fujimori was there. And these are just some quotes from the Carver Conversation. Creativity and imagination can't be compelling if it's instantly accessible and cliche. I completely agree with Mako that creativity is stifled if you think that people need to instantly understand it. In other words, if they don't need to sit and ponder your work or pull back the layers or even see it and hear it a few times in order to see the depth, then it might be lacking in creativity. In the vacuum of thinking, in the realm of all that is divisive, like politics, art has a unique opportunity. Again, in our world right now, as we see all of the crisis of COVID-19, of course, arts has a unique place to speak into that. This was an interesting comment from Mako. He said typically younger artists are driven by the market. I think what he meant was when you're young, and let's use, for example, somebody who's in a band or writing songs, they are motivated more to make it or to develop an audience and to be fueled even by tickets or the amount of people that download their song or come to their show. And those kind of markers are important. And yet there's a sense of maturity that comes beyond that as you've identified, yes, I do have an audience and I no longer just have to try to write or create music for the sake of just market-driven ideas. I think it was an interesting idea to consider. This week, we'll be looking at Disruptive Witness Chapter 6 and then Culture Care Chapter 18 along with your manifesto. Continuing on, this is a video that I would love for you to watch. It's about 4 minutes long. Here's the name of it. If you go to YouTube, or you can just copy this URL and go look at it. It's a pretty amazing story. It's actually sponsored by Budweiser, but it tells a really compelling story where Dwayne Wade was not lost in his craft of being a basketball player. There was far more to his who he was as a person, even during his time of playing basketball. That video reminds me of Hebrews 10, which says this: let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Again, this idea that we would encourage each other towards the goodness of who God has made us is pretty critical, that you don't just get lost in your craft or your creativity, but you use it as a way of living into your calling that is identified in God and Christ. Show Barakah. I want to be more bold about what the world needs to hear. Again, it was a really good quote from last year's conference. Everybody's life is a song, but God is the singer. Again, God works through us. His fuel for our creativity is something we need to recognize, which brings me to the point of the first Old Testament artist, Bezalel. This is an interesting concept that we see in Exodus 35, and it really tells us the story of the design of the tabernacle, and it says that Bezalel was filled with the Spirit of God. In other words, it wasn't just that he was made to be smart or special skills with creativity, but that God actually used this as his own inspiration for his life. And he was to use this to perform in every inventive work. So here's my question. Have you considered God as the ultimate source of creativity? I think oftentimes, even as Christians, we overlook the idea that God would want us to live a creative life. How about the enemy of creativity? A cluttered life, overt busyness cannot play into being creative and expressive. Erwin McManus, there's a subtle difference between truth and honesty. We can be on the search for truth, but never honest with ourselves. I think sometimes this can be true. Can a person hide behind searching for truth while not being honest with themselves and not honestly seeking true transformation? Of course, this is possible. In other words, we use language and rhetoric, and yet in a true, sincere way, we are not really seeking truth that would come from God. Again, from your book that we're reading this week in chapter 18, Mako says, do we need beauty in our lives? If we desire to be fully human, the answer is yes, absolutely. We must shift from asking what do we need to what do we long for. What do you long for? Can beauty point to that reality? Beautifully said from Mako. Barry Jones, the dominant question in American Christianity has tended to be, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? Of course, that's a critical question. But we should also ask, do you have a communal relationship with Jesus? again, I think as creatives and as artists, we need the role of community, other people that can speak into the ways that we use our crafts and our technical skills. Um, so again, just as a review, read Disruptive Witness Chapter 6 and Mako Chapter 18. Those will be posted same as usual Thursday night at 11:59. And then your two responses to other people's. Plus, I'm going to ask again to look at these notes and just make a comment on one of these points that kind of spoke to you, as well as writing your manifesto paper. This will be good. And let me know if there's anything I can do for you. Be happy to help you out this week.